Welcome to 28 Storms. This is your tropical weather update for Saturday, July 2nd. We are looking good in the tropics this afternoon. There's a very weak wave passing over the Yucatan Peninsula, but you can't even really notice it on satellite imagery. There is a tropical wave flaring near Hispaniola, and we will take a closer look at that one. And there's a third and final wave near the Cape Verde Islands, but there are no signs of development at this time. Even though conditions are rather tranquil, the National Hurricane Center is still keeping a watch on two particular systems. One is yet again that tropical wave near Hispaniola. They have outlined it, but they only give it about a 0% chance of development within the next 2 days. And in the eastern Pacific, they're still monitoring the remnants of Tropical Storm Arlene that have come all the way across Mexico and are now beginning to enter the eastern Pacific. We'll closely look at both of these features. First off, all of the 4th of July festivities are looking good along much of the Gulf Coast and the East Coast for that matter. You just have to watch out for the daily sea breeze activity that develops during the afternoon hours, as we're really beginning to see near Mobile, Gulf Shores, and Pensacola. And down in the Gulf of Mexico, we're looking really good with really not anything in the way of convection down there. There is a very weak tropical wave that's flaring near the western Caribbean, but that's due to a lot of wind shear, which is not good for any tropical development. And here's our tropical wave also interacting with an upper level low to its west. And as I turn on the water vapor imagery, you'll get a better visual as to what is going on. We still see an upper level low here near eastern Cuba, and it's causing a lot of upper level divergence, which is generating some convection, but it's keeping the wave feature rather disorganized, and it's really tough for any organized area of low pressure to begin to form. Over time, we expect some of this convection associated with the wave to begin moving into the western Atlantic and Bahamas, where it will generate an increased threat of afternoon shower and thunderstorm activity. But as of right now, it does not look like upper-level conditions will be favorable enough for any type of tropical development. The wave over here will continue moving westward into Central America with no threat of development either. Taking a quick look at the eastern Pacific, we can see the remnants of Arlene have made it off the coastline near Manzanillo, and we see a very weak low to mid-level circulation, but it's fairly void of any deep convection, as we see on the latest infrared. And the water vapor imagery is not very promising for the future of this system, as it's moving into an area of not only cooler water temperatures, but there is a large mass of dry air all around the Baja Peninsula, and the remnants of Arlene are simply not going to develop in this environment. We're also looking good to the south of Mexico and the far eastern Pacific. There's no organized area of convection down there today. We just see a very broad monsoon trough. Once again, nothing really organized. And it's just a matter of time, though, until we begin to see another area of low pressure begin to form. I don't think anything is imminent over the next 1 to 3 days. And the models don't show all too much over the next 5 to 7 days, although there is a trend or a growing trend toward a deepening area of low pressure, especially within the next 120 to 168 hours down here. And we'll take a look at that once we look at the model guidance. And here's just another take on things. This is the latest SIMS wind shear analysis. Much of the Caribbean, West Atlantic, and deep tropical Atlantic are currently unfavorable. The upper level winds are just too strong. And in the wake of that favorable upper level ridge that fueled Tropical Storm Arlene, there's really not much of that left here in the eastern Pacific anymore. There's a lot of wind shear dominating both basins at this current time. And again, it's mainly due to these westerly winds that are being enhanced by this upper level trough that's draped across much of the region. We can see why that tropical wave over Hispaniola is headed for the western Atlantic. Again, we still have a weakness between two areas of subtropical ridging, one over the south-central United States and one over the central Atlantic. And right there in the middle, we have some troughiness along the eastern seaboard that's going to draw the tropical wave northward. This trough is also located in the mid to upper levels, so we can see it on water vapor imagery. Again, we have a general area of ridging here over the central United States, followed up by a troughing right here along the Carolinas and even into Florida. And that's going to really pick up our wave, and that's going to be down here within the next couple days. Here is the latest 12Z Canadian, and it develops two tropical cyclones on this model run. First off, you see the tropical wave moving into the western Atlantic, and it doesn't take long for this to develop into a very weak tropical storm as it parallels the east coast of Florida before moving into Georgia and the Carolinas. And then we also have a tropical cyclone that forms down the road over here in the eastern Pacific. By looking at the low-level vorticity, we can see that a little vort max that comes off Hispaniola quickly develops over here near the Bahamas before beginning to get picked up by that trough and moves more toward the north. Also, the second system in the Eastern Pacific begins to organize fairly quickly, just within the next 48 to 72 hours, before developing into a tropical storm over there. But as usual, the Canadian seems to be overdeveloping possibly both systems. First off, in the Atlantic, this is the latest shear pattern, and the forecast calls for fairly strong upper-level winds across much of the Bahamas throughout the period. Perhaps a small pocket of upper-level ridging develops along the eastern coast of the Florida Peninsula and into the Carolinas, but that's a really small area of upper-level ridging, and I highly suspect that the Canadian model is just overdoing things as it typically does. What's a bit more encouraging if you're a tropical weather fan is the Canadian does develop a much more legit area of upper-level ridging in the Eastern Pacific. If I can show you at the end of this run, that's a fairly large upper-level ridge, and that's in the general direction of where it's developing a tropical cyclone out there. On the other hand, the latest GFS does not show tropical development in either basin over the next 7 days. As I begin the loop of the sea level pressure chart, you don't really see anything that stands out. We do see a broad area of low pressure over the Caribbean, but certainly nothing concentrated. And toward the very end of the run, you do see a weak area of low pressure begin to ride up the western periphery of the subtropical Atlantic ridge, and that is related to the tropical wave that will be moving into the Bahamas. So simply put, the GFS does not show as much development, and it takes the low pressure area more often to the West Atlantic versus the Bahamas and Florida Peninsula, as the Canadian model was showing, and it's also not showing anything out here in the Eastern Pacific. Low-level vorticity shows that the model does take the tropical wave more into the Bahamas, where it tries to organize perhaps a little bit, but certainly not anything close to a tropical depression. And interestingly enough, it does show some slight intensification, just as the system is nearing to the west of Bermuda. And I believe that solution more than I would the Canadian. And meanwhile, out here in the Eastern Pacific, it does show a very weak area of low pressure begin to develop between days 5 and 7, but not an organized tropical cyclone. The GFS is also keeping upper-level winds highly unfavorable across much of Florida and the Bahamas, and I fully suspect that that is going to verify based on the latest water vapor imagery. But one thing that does stand out to me is that it does keep upper-level conditions a bit favorable for tropical development, as that broad area of low pressure moves just to the west of Bermuda in about 5 to 6 days. So the western Atlantic could be an area to watch. I don't think there's any solid evidence of a tropical system developing there at the moment, but if there's going to be anything in the Atlantic, it could be in that general region. The latest European run does look promising for some Eastern Pacific development, and it also brings that broad area of low-level energy into the Bahamas, but it keeps it fairly elongated, as you will soon see. This is the 24-hour forecast. We see a low-level vortex now beginning to move into the far southern Atlantic. Also, in the meantime, we have a very broad area of low pressure developing to the west of Honduras out here in the Eastern Pacific, and by 48 and 72 hours, both areas become a bit more prominent. We can clearly see that the tropical wave has moved into the Bahamas, and we have an organizing mass of low pressure and convection to the south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec. By 96 and 120 hours, we see that the European has developed a very weak tropical cyclone here to the south of Mexico, and in the meantime a very weak and disorganized tropical wave-like feature is beginning to move north to the east of Florida before it becomes entrained in a much larger non-tropical area of trophiness over here across the east coast United States. By 144 hours, the very weak tropical cyclone is out of the frame now. It's continuing westward to the south of Mexico, and in the meantime there's really nothing left out here in the Atlantic Basin. There's just some widespread disorganized activity along a trough over here across the Florida Peninsula, and that's pretty much it for the rest of the whole entire basin. So that is your tropical update for this Saturday. I don't think we'll see any classified tropical cyclones within the next 48 hours. Perhaps the best chance of anything coming afterward will be in the Eastern Pacific to the south of Mexico, but we still have a few days to keep an eye on anything that develops down there. And that tropical wave will come across Hispaniola, possibly setting the stage for some disorganized disturbance or activity out there in the western Atlantic. And we'll just keep an eye on both of these systems for you here at 28storms.com. Expect another update, or at least a video update, by tomorrow afternoon.